p.m. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and council colleagues in the chamber this evening. To my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett. Good evening to members of staff, both here in the chamber and who may be participating online. We do introduce staff at the time that they are speaking. And good evening to members of the public here in attendance in the chamber, but also to any who may be watching the live webcast or a recording of the meeting at a later date. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wisanish Nation, and we're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia. And in turning to approval of the agenda, we have three changes since the agenda was published last Thursday. The first is Councillor O'Keefe has requested raising item 15.7 under correspondence for information to correspondence, and that will become item 14B. And we've received some additional correspondence on two agenda items. With regards to our first agenda item, regarding the liquor license amendment application, we have 4 additional pieces of written submissions, and those will be received with approval of the agenda. I would just note that those were received from Raymond and Susan Lindsay, Michael Shear and Sandy Gray, Terry Miller, and from a representative of the neighboring Small Gods Brewing on 3rd Street. And the last item is we've received a written submission from Catherine Squire regarding agenda item 6A. And with that, I would seek a mover to approve our agenda as amended.
Agenda to be moved as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now turn to public participation, and for those who looking at our agenda, we'll have 2 public participation periods this evening. We'll have start with our general public participation period, where members of the public can come forward, speak to any item on the agenda for a period of up to 4 minutes. And but we have a special public participation. We're required statutorily to have a special public participation period with regards to liquor license applications or amendments, and so we'll do that separately. So anyone wishing to come up in public participation can, or wishing to speak to that liquor license amendment, can wait for the special public participation. But we'll now open the general public participation period open, and I'll call for a first time if there's anyone wishing to address council this evening. I'll call for a second time if there's anyone wishing to address council, and for a third and final time. Thank you. I'll close the general public participation period and turn to item 4BB1.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to address the council.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was made aware of you, Mr. Wightman. My apologies. I will now turn to Mr. Dave Wightman, who is participating in public participation via Zoom. Good evening, Mr. Wightman. You do have the floor for 4 minutes. Please, we have your name, if you could provide your municipality that you reside in, and you have the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mayor McNeil Smith, councilors, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Wightman. I'm the chairman of the Amica Beechwood Village Residents Council. I want to speak to you in support of my letter, which is on the agenda of your meeting this evening. My letter describes an unsafe traffic situation facing residents and staff trying to get onto Mills Road from our parking lot. The visibility in both directions is severely restricted by vehicles parked too close to the driveway. One finds it necessary to actually move out into the traffic lane to see any oncoming vehicles. A very dangerous move. I've had very helpful discussions with Ryan Campo in the engineering department, who took me through chapter and verse of bylaw in 1966, with Jen Clary, director of engineering, and with your office, sir, who took me through, who suggested this Zoom link, which is a very nice way to address council. In my letter, I propose a simple amendment to Bylaw 1966. The amendment would widen the no parking area either side of a seniors care home driveway from 3 meters to 6 meters. I believe this will alleviate this dangerous situation. I am respectfully requesting that you give serious consideration to my letter and direct the engineering department to study it further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wightman. We appreciate your correspondence and also speaking before us or to us this evening via Zoom. We're glad that that worked out for you as an option. I will turn to council. Council, you'll know that in our agenda package under correspondence from information, there is correspondence from Mr. Wightman making his request, a request for an amendment to our bylaw, and there is a staff response from Ms. Clary to that. If council did want to consider that further this evening, it's under correspondence for information. We would need a motion at this time to raise it to correspondence to have any discussion. So I will look to the wishes of council if there are any. As seeing none, I will leave that this evening, and thank you again, Mr. Wightman, for coming before council. I'll next turn to item 4BB1, which is our liquor license, which is a liquor license amendment application number LA010 for Beacon Brewing at 9829 3rd Street to allow the addition of an outdoor patio space. We have considered this at a previous meeting. We requested that notice be sent out to neighboring residents and businesses. We've received 13 written submissions that were published with the agenda last Thursday, and as I indicated during agenda approval, that we've received an additional 4 letters, written submissions. So I will now, we'll deal with this, council, in 2 steps. The first step is we'll have the special public participation period, allowing anyone to speak. We'll close that, and then we'll turn to the staff report, the recommendation and consideration of the written submissions. So for a first time, I'll ask if there's anyone wishing to participate during the special public participation period. We do not have anyone confirmed via Zoom. I'll call for a second time. And for a third time, I will close that special public participation period, and we'll now turn to the staff report, which does have the recommendation before us, and I would turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening, Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you. So following the previous council meeting where this was considered, staff proceeded with sending out the public notification, which included 2 consecutive issues of the Peninsula News Review and notifications sent out to all residents within 100 meters of the location. As you've indicated, a total of 17 responses came back. 13 of these were in favor. 1 was from a business down the street, and 4 were opposed, and staff's recommendation remains unchanged. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. So we do have a lengthy recommendation. Sorry, I first will turn to if there are any questions from staff. We'll hold our comments, but if there are any questions of staff, otherwise we could have someone indicate they'd wish to move the recommendation, and then we can have discussion. Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to staff. Other licensed patios throughout the community, do staff recollect whether or not there's been a level of concern expressed within the community with regards to either hours of operations or noise, number 1, and number 2, whether or not any process exists outside of council if we were to receive a number of concerns of that nature at any such premises. Thank you.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rentoul, so we are not aware of any concerns or complaints raised with respect to brewpub patios specifically, and specifically in this area. We're just aware of 1 complaint several years ago regarding an outdoor patio closer an establishment closer to the waterfront.
Thank you. With respect to a process then, if there were to be a number of complaints, again, in general with respect to this type of licensing, is the point of contact for complainants to the town, or is it through the province?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, it would be through the town, and it would be through our bylaw enforcement officer process, a written formal complaint, and be referred to bylaw, and they would review it and investigate the complaint.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Question through you to staff. So continuing on in that vein, so if the issue, it sounds like most of the concerns that have been raised are due to noise. So do we have because the license for the patio is issued by the LCRB, what leverage does the town have in terms of bylaw enforcement? So we could, in regards to the noise concern, can we shut that down, or would we send something to the LCRB to action?
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, so we do have a bylaw that specifically looks to regulate noise-related concerns within the municipality. I'll maybe let Ms. Clary speak to sort of what level of authority we have to address a particular noise issue associated with an establishment that serves liquor.
Okay.
Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening. So the town's noise bylaw does speak to disturbing the peace and quiet of the enjoyment of the neighborhood. However, in the downtown, we would expect, a certain level of noise to occur regularly anyway. So it's really up to the bylaw officer's discretion as to what would be disturbing in the downtown where there already is a level of noise expected. But we do have measures in our noise bylaw if restaurants or if businesses were just being totally disregarding the town's noise bylaw. So we do have measures in there to address that.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duck and then to Councillor Novick.
Through you, Mayor, to staff, just a question of clarification. There was one of the letter writers noted smoking, and I'm just wondering if these patios are considered non-smoking areas.
I believe they are non-smoking areas as per the CRD smoking bylaws. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through the mayor to staff, do we have any idea how many seats the proponent is planning to place in this patio?
Through the mayor to Councillor Novick, it's not a very large space. It's just the same size as the existing planter that's out there right now. So I believe the image in the staff report from last week shows the conceptual design of the patio, but likely no more than 8 people, maybe 10. It's not a very large space, and that would sort of be cheek by jowl. If there was something like bistro tables or something like that out there, it would probably be 3 small bistro tables, like 6 or 9 people, something like that.
A follow-up?
Please.
And through mayor to staff, do our bylaws have any say on the density of seating on such patio spaces?
Our bylaws wouldn't. It's possible that something might be regulated by the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, but I don't know those details.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
My guess would be no.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just for clarification, I'm just checking on the letter dated April 17th from the proponents, and they say the proposed patio would have up to 20 seats, just for Councillor Novick.
Sorry, I looked and I couldn't find that.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Okay, seeing no further questions, look to Amir. I'll turn to Councillor Duck to move.
And I so move the recommendation. And do you want them split into individual, or do you want to address the whole thing? Okay, whole thing. Getting the nod. Number 1, that council, having considered the location, person, capacity, and hours of liquor service of the establishment, recommend to the LCRB that an amendment to the Beacons Brewing existing manufactured liquor license with lounge area endorsement to include an outdoor patio area at 9829 3rd Street be approved on the basis that the application is generally consistent with the Town of Sydney Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Policy number DV015. And number 2, that council comments on the prescribed LCRB consideration are as follows regarding 1, the impact of noise on nearby residents. A, it is the opinion of council that the approval of the license would result in noise levels that are acceptable and consistent with the area's zoning designation as a commercial center for the community and Saanich Peninsula. 2, the impact of the community on the community if the application is approved. A, the view of the Town of Sydney is that on balance, the impact of the proposed amendment to include an outdoor patio be either minimal or generally positive. 3, the views of the residents and a description of the method used to gather views. A, council acknowledges that views of residents regarding the proposal are generally positive and concerns raised can be addressed by the applicant. B, that the staff forward the report dated May 16th, 2023 regarding this application, which includes information on the public consultation process and comments related to the submissions received during the process to the LCRB as additional information, including a summary of any responses provided in person at the May 23rd, 2023 council meeting.
I'll second that.
Moved by Councillor Duck and seconded by Councillor Novick. I'll turn to the mover to motivate.
No additional information.
Thank you. Councillor Novick.
I'm in favor of this. There's already a patio in that area. I don't have concerns that the noise levels will be excessive. To my knowledge, this is a responsible operator, and I think this sort of thing is good for the town. It creates activity, creates action. It acts as a bit of a draw to the downtown core, and that's something that the city needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. Seeing no further speakers, I'll just briefly comment that I want to thank members of the public for their submissions, and that on balance, I think the experience with the neighboring brewery that has, I believe it's close to 60 patio spaces, while it's only operated at just a little under a year, coming up to a year. It's received no complaints to the town, and I think as per questions from council members this evening, there's certainly process in place through bylaw enforcement to address concerns as they may arise. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And thank you to staff. We have no public hearings, no presentations, petitions, or delegations this evening. We're going to turn now to Section 5, which is bylaws, and under 5A we have bylaw number 2256, which is a bylaw to amend the Reserve Fund Establishment Bylaw number 1993. And I would turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction. Good evening, Mr. Hissick. Sorry, we do show Mr. Hissick as possibly connected to Zoom, but
I think he may be having Zoom issues, Mr. Mayor, so I can briefly introduce this if
well, thank you, Mr. Humble.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this oh, there we go.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Hissick.
Man.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about that.
No trouble. We've all been there.
All right. The town recently received a one-time provincial grant of $3.82 million under the Growing Communities Fund program. The province requires that these funds be placed into a separate reserve and used only for purposes eligible under their grant program. Recommendations for use of the funds will come forward later this year and/or through the next budget process. Staff will continue to monitor and clarify eligibility criteria, which we expect will be expanded through experience. Preliminary information about the eligibility criteria are outlined in Schedule B attached to the report, but at this time, from a staff perspective, the most likely uses are the active transportation plan, perhaps the roundabout project, parks and rec facilities, and stormwater management. With that, are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions on the report. I'll turn first to Councillor Garnett, then to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hisik. Just a brief question. When I'm reading the letter from the government, and it speaks to being the principal objective being to increase the local housing supply, and I'm appreciating that we don't know everything yet, and these are just recommendations that are going to come forward, and these are just some ideas you're floating around. Do you see that the possibility that within local portion of affordable, attainable housing developments, that part of these funds could be used to, say, offer something similar to the Aranza in terms of permissive tax exemptions and waiving of fees? Would the money be allowed to be used in that capacity?
My understanding, Councillor, is that it's meant for capital expenditures, not making up for lost revenue or tax exemptions. But perhaps there is a way, if the right opportunity comes forward, to assist with housing through some contribution.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Garnett for sharing that question and observation. Clearly, within the appendix, local portion of affordable attainable housing developments is on that list, and so I think it's just important for us to recognize, and there's not necessarily a definitive description as of yet around eligibility in those types of projects, and so Mr. Hisik, you've named a few here, but just to clarify, your intent is really it comes down to the budgeting process. These funds will be held in a suitable reserve to be utilized at the direction of council in keeping with the grant funding eligibility, correct?
That is the recommendation at this time, and if ideas come forward prior to the next budget, we'll certainly bring them forward for consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Seeing no further questions, we can proceed this evening by giving first, second, and third readings with separate resolutions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that bylaw number 2256 to amend Town of Sydney Reserve Fund Establishment bylaw number 1993 be given first reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries. Councillor Garnett.
Move second reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. This is the time if there's any discussion. Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Motion carries.
And I'll move third reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? That motion carries unanimous, and that will come forward for consideration of adoption at a future meeting. Thank you again, Mr. Hisik. We'll turn to Section 6, Development Permits and Development Variance Permits, and under 6A we have Development Variance Permit Application number DV100335 at 2356 and 2362 Orchard Avenue and 9658 and 9662 6th Street to allow for a reduced minimum permitted side yard setback for heat pumps. We had no written submissions when the agenda was published, but we did have the additional written submission that I noted during agenda approval. And I will turn to Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move that the development variance be approved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, second by Councillor Duck. I'll turn to the mover.
Nothing further.
And the seconder. We have any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're turning now to item 6B, which is Development Variance Permit Application number DV100337 at 10245 Forsythia Place to retroactively allow for the construction of additions to the existing rear deck to remain within the minimum rear yard setback and a bay window on the ground floor that exceeds the maximum size permitted. Council, you'll note in reviewing the agenda package that we do have 7 written submissions. All are in support of the applicant's application, and we do have, we had at previous meetings sent it out for notice, and we've received those submissions, and we have a recommendation. Turn to Councillor
I was going
Duncan.
to move the recommendation that DV be approved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Duncan. Wish to motivate?
I'm just, I thought that the work that the proponent did on this and securing and and reflecting the approval of his neighbors, I think this is worth moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, I was actually just struck by the fact that so many of the neighbors cared enough to write and approvingly. And the bit about what a good landlord he is, like, got me, like, right in that chunk of charcoal I keep for a heart. It was really nice anyway. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Garnett? No? Seeing no further discussion, no, it's nice to see that through our process of deliberating at council and then sending out notice to neighboring residents, and we do receive feedback is helpful to council. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? And that carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now looking to at adoption of minutes, and we can have I would seek a mover to approve the minutes of our special council meeting of May 8th at 5 p.m. and the minutes of our regular council meeting on May 8th at 6 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Duck.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Novick. Any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We have no business not completed at a previous meeting. We're turning to rise and report from in-camera minutes, and the following motion was passed at our council in-camera meeting on April 24th.
Point of order, do we have the regular council meeting 7B?
Sorry, we moved them together.
We moved them together, I'm sorry.
Nope, thanks for that. Under rise and report, the council passed the following resolution at the in-camera meeting of April 24th regarding the Economic Development Committee, and the resolution was that the Economic Development Committee be discontinued. And I want to take this opportunity to thank members of the Economic Development Committee that were appointed earlier in the previous term and met a number of times. The most significant recommendation that I think came forward from that committee was the recommendation of an economic development strategy, which we're in process to date. I'll note that letters of appreciation and thanks were sent to all members of that committee over the past week. And I want to acknowledge Mr. David Cavally, who's in attendance this evening, who has served on that committee in different terms and as chair and vice chair of that committee. So we thank that committee for their contributions over time, and the citizen appointments, both representatives from different sectors of our local business economy and residents at large. I'll now turn to the mayor's report under number 10, and I just want to turn to that here. And those are the CRD board highlights from the May 10th CRD board meeting. And normally I don't highlight because I think the summary that's provided is very helpful, and certainly there are links to the staff reports, webcasts, and media releases, and the CRD website. But two that I'd like to touch on, and the first is the Capital Regional District 2022 annual report. I've said this in previous years, but I think it's helpful to residents as we all do pay taxes to the various CRD services. That the annual report is an outstanding report and a good starting place if you haven't looked before. On the variety of services that the CRD does provide, from drinking water to parks to sewage treatment and so on, and Heartland landfill and so on. And so I encourage that, and I'll just note that CRD Chief Administrative Officer Ted Robbins did forward a covering letter and the annual report separately, which we have in our correspondence for information, but that's in the annual report. The second item I'd like to highlight is that the CRD is actually the shareholder of the Capital Regional Housing Corporation, and we had the annual general meeting within our board meeting for that corporation, and included in that is the 2022 annual report for the Capital Regional District Housing Corporation. And I think it's worth highlighting each year that the CRD is the largest nonprofit housing provider on Vancouver Island, providing homes to nearly 4,000 residents with 1,877 units in 51 buildings that are owned or operated across the capital region. In the last 4-year term, 665 new units were added to bring it up to that level. And in the plans that have been brought forward by staff to CRD board in this term, it's anticipated there'll be close to 700 new units over the next 4 to 5 years. So I'll leave my summary at that. We don't, as council know, receive reports by motion for information. It's received for information by virtue of being our agenda, but I will turn to any questions or comments. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe first and then Councillor Novick.
Thank you. There was one thing that I wanted to comment on. I delved into the Parks and Trails Progress Report, and the one thing that I wanted to highlight that I thought was good that they focused on in 2022 was accessibility. So they did complete an accessibility audit at a few regional parks to identify potential improvements for accessibility. They built an accessible fishing dock at Elk and Beaver Lake Regional Park. There's a new user-friendly nature playground was added, and construction began on an accessible washroom facility at Hamsterley Beach and Elk and Beaver Lake. And they've installed new Moby mats installed at Thetis Lake, which makes it easier for people in wheelchairs and mobility devices to get close to the lake. And I understand that they're going to continue doing further accessibility audits in the coming year to identify other areas of improvement. So I think those are good things, and I think of interest to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for highlighting that. And I have the opportunity, serving as CRD Director, to also be chairing the CRD Regional Parks Committee. And recently we highlighted that CRD is currently operating 33 regional parks and 100 kilometers of regional trails, the four major trails. And that accounts for some 13,300 hectares of parkland. And over the past 20 years, we've, through a land acquisition fund at the CRD, we've acquired additional nearly 5,000 hectares to bring it to that 13,000. And so our regional parks continue to grow, and regional trails continue to improve. And I believe it's next month at the regional parks meeting, we'll be bringing forward the longer-term regional parks and trails strategic plan. So look forward to highlighting that when that goes through its process. Thank you again, Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, did I see another hand, Councillor Novick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious with reference to the CRD Housing Corporation. I'm wondering if you've heard anything more about the Regional Housing Trust, if that had been allocated any further money with the new Growing Communities funds or any of the new money that's coming in from the government, or if the Housing Trust has just been left to dissolve.
No, thanks for the question. For members of the public, the CRD, together with the provincial government through BC Housing and the federal government through Canadian Mortgage and Housing, put together a $90 million, each contributed $30 million. This was announced 2 terms ago in late 2018, or sorry, early in 2018, I think it was. It was for the purposes of building 4,000 affordable units with 20% at the provincial shelter rate. And the CRD, previous to that program coming together, had a CRD Housing Trust Fund, which was monies in reserve to allocate towards certain types of housing projects, and a Regional Housing Trust Fund Commission, which had representatives from all the municipal councils, and Councillor Novick is a representative this term, would meet periodically to give recommendations to the CRD board on those allocations. That fund went from 90 million to 120 million last term, because the cost of building a unit rose so dramatically during the last 4-year term. And we still wanted to, all 3 levels of government wanted to try to meet the target of 4,000 units. So we each pooled $10 million to bring it up to the 120 million. And basically that fund is coming close to the end of its life, and those monies being allocated. And so there really isn't a longer purpose for the Regional Housing Trust Fund Advisory Group, if I can call it that, to continue. It will meet periodically, but the CRD board last term gave recommendation and direction to staff to create the Regional Housing First Program 2.0. So what will we do going next? And that should be coming forward to the CRD board, committees and board later this year. And at this time, we just don't know if there will be an ongoing role for the Regional Housing Trust Fund Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. Seeing no further discussion or questions, thank you for that. We will turn to the next item on the agenda. And we have no council reports this evening, so we're turning to committee reports, and I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, who is our chair of the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 15th. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Any corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries.
I'll go to the first recommendation. Committee recommends, and I so move, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9614 Epco Drive be notified regarding Development Variance Application Number DV100338 to reduce the required minimum side setback for a heat pump, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous.
Second recommendation, committee recommends, and I so move, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9675 3rd Street be notified regarding Development Variance Application Number DV100334 to relax the requirement for 1 parking space to 0 spaces for a secondary suite, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That carries unanimous.
And third and last recommendation, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10412 Resthaven Drive be notified regarding Development Variance Application Number DV100339 to increase the maximum permitted gross floor area of a secondary suite from 90 square meters to 120.1 square meters, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Duncan, seconded by Councillor Novick. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Duncan. And we're now turning to the, sorry, I gave a check mark besides the wrong. We're now turning to item 13B, which is the license of occupation entrance feature at Beacon Avenue and Highway 17. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Point of information, 13A.
Okay, so I'm trying to speed too fast here. We will go first to 13A, which is the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Cost Sharing Agreement Amendment, and we'll turn to Mr. Hissick, please. Hello again.
Hello again, Mr. Mayor. So the town was recently informed that our $5 million grant application for the roundabout was successful. These grants include an agreement covering the administrative details that we have to follow. And having read those details, in order for us to be compliant with the terms and conditions, our cost sharing agreement with our funding partners must be amended. So one of the changes is that at least $5 million in eligible costs must flow through the town in order to be claimed against the grant, and it's only the net project costs over and above the reimbursable amount that may be subject to cost sharing with our partners. The amended CSA before you reflects the necessary details and reverts to the original 40-40-20 cost sharing split that was initially contemplated. Now, this is based on the fact that the net cost is now well within the early project budget, and the North Saanich contribution falls well under their previously set maximum. The town's maximum share is now anticipated to be up to $1.04 million. And staff will consider options for the ultimate funding source that the town's share should be paid with, and will bring forward a recommendation later this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to council if there are any questions regarding the report. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of questions. Thank you, through you to staff. Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'm just curious, given that there's a $600,000 contingency, I believe, why we are upping the $1,040,000 to $1.1 million. I know it's only $60,000, and I'm just curious as to what the rationale is behind it.
essentially just rounding up. I'm not anticipating spending the entire amount, but it's better to have a little more than find ourselves a little short at the end.
Thank you. One more, if I may.
Please.
In the existing cost sharing agreement, under number 3B, North Sanet's share shall be capped at 1.1 million, 20% of 5.5 million. And then under the replace with cost sharing, number 3, the 520,000 is now 20%. I'm curious, under number D, or letter D, it says North Sanet's cost shall not exceed the total amount shown in C above, which is the 520,000. Any net project cost exceeding the net cost indicated in C above shall be shared equally between the airport and Sydney. So perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as I'm reading that, it seems to me that we're now capping the North Saanich contribution at 520,000.
That is 20% of the net costs, and that, I think, is the most we can hope for.
So even though they've previously, if I may continue, even though they've previously capped their contribution at 1.1 million, I guess I'm just wondering, like, I'm assuming these numbers are going to be where we're going to fall in ballpark, but
Sorry, Councillor Garnett, I appreciate you asking the question. If you wish to speak to the information in terms of motivating about the agreement, that would be best while the motion is on the floor.
no, I'm still asking a question. I'm just leading into a question.
Okay,
if that's
that's
okay.
fine.
So I guess I'm wondering, like, I was doing a hypothetical if we added $1 million to it. So would it be true that case, if there was $1 million added onto the cost, then VA and Town of Sydney would be responsible for 500,000 each? So by my calculation, perhaps you can say if this is right or wrong, our contributions each would then go to 43 and North Saanich would then go to 14. Would that be fairly accurate? If that were to happen, hypothetically speaking?
I'm not going to question those numbers. You've done your math, but we are adding the previously committed to 20% North Saanich share and just applying it to a different net cost. That's all we're doing, and trying to give ourselves the best chance of having this approved by our funding partners.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Seeing no further questions, we do have a staff recommendation. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
And I'll move the recommendation that that the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout cost sharing agreement be amended to reflect cost sharing on a net cost basis by replacing sections 3 and 5 with the new sections in Appendix A attached. 2, that the total project budget be increased to 7.6 million with the net cost to the town reduced to 1.1 million, incorporating the grant and revised cost shares of the funding partners. And 3, that the amended CSA be forwarded to the airport and North Saanich for consideration.
We have it moved.
Second.
We have it seconded by Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to the mover to motivate.
I just want to congratulate staff on bringing this together and certainly demonstrating that we can get this done as a community. And I look forward to seeing the town administrate this and the airport deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Rintoul.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. To speak to what I was speaking to previously, and I understand the rationale what staff is saying, but I do struggle with this, given that our partner had said that they were willing to go to 1.1 million, and I'd hate to see the cost go much higher than this and have the Town of Sydney residents being paid what I would consider, a higher share than what would originally been agreed upon. So I do have reservations on that particular aspect, just because I feel like we're changing the cap from what they originally had said they would be willing to pay. So I don't think that they would, if the numbers went up and their numbers went up to 600,000 from 520, I don't think they would balk at that. So I don't think making this change is necessary. And so I'm actually not going to agree with the recommendation based on that alone. I'm just not comfortable with it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll speak for a moment, and I also appreciate the work done by staff. Greatly appreciate the partnership that we've had with the District of North Saanich and the Victoria Airport Authority to bring this project to the stage that it's at, with shovels hopefully to turn in the ground in the coming weeks. And thankful to staff our staff, and in particular Mr. Hissick, who shepherded the grant application, the $5 million grant application to success. That significantly reduces the cost for all 3 partners. I certainly acknowledge the points brought forward by my colleague, Councillor Garnett. And stepping back to the original agreements approved when the project was first costed at $5 million, and the first cost-sharing agreement was agreed to by the three parties. It was Sydney and the VAA at 40% and North Saanich at 20% with a cap, as has been highlighted, of approximately 1.1 million. And so it was understood at that time that if there were increases in the cost of the project, which there have been over the last 3 years, that North Saanich's contribution would have been capped at that, and that the VAA and Sydney would have shared in additional costs. And what we're seeing now is, while the cost of the project has increased, when we take into account the $5 million grant and we see the net cost to the parties, each of the three parties in this amended agreement, if this project comes in at or under budget, we will each be saving about 50% or just over 50% of the original amounts we committed to in that $5 million project. And that is for North Saanich, $520,000, and just over $1 million for each for the Sydney and the VAA. So, you know, we had the cap, our council and the other two parties agreed to that funding formula, if you will, during the first costing of the project, and we are continuing to be consistent with that. But as I say, I respect the comments from colleagues. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, Councillor Garnett. The motion carries. We are now turning to item 13B, which is license of occupation, the entrance feature at Beacon Avenue and Highway 17. And I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Hello again, Ms. Clary.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this license of occupation has been held by the town since 2002. It's on the corner of Beacon and Highway 17 on the Airport Travelodge property. It's the former home of Wanda, the fishing boat, which was removed some time ago. However, there was always a vision to do some larger entrance feature to the town in this corner. Staff did investigate installing some flags and potentially some signage here. However, the cost became too much for staff to really recommend doing that when we do have the Sydney by the Sea sign right across the road. So instead of maintaining this license of occupation for $200 a year and the town continuing to maintain the small area of landscaping here, we're recommending that we not renew the license of occupation. And I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, staff, or Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you. I recall this discussion last term, and I think the consensus was for $200. You know, let's keep it under our control and management for future application. Signage certainly came to mind, and I think, you know, thank you for shopping in Sydney signs. Something of that nature may have been discussed. So I take it from the report, staff have considered signage of that nature internally, and come up with the suggestion that given the nature of the signage across the street facing incoming traffic, that it's not cost effective to look to pursue that.
Through to Councillor Rintoul, that is the feeling of staff. However, if council would like us to pursue something here, we can, you know, do it further. But it you know, it's not cheap to do anything these days. So yeah, that was the feeling of staff.
Sure, thank you. You know, and I understand and appreciate that. And at risk of motivating, I think, again, part of that rationale was maybe at the time when this was last visited, given that cost was maybe an opportunity, you know, centered towards the business community, or maybe even directional to West Sydney, something of that nature. So I'm not convinced that it's not something that we couldn't, you know, do with in future under economic development opportunities. So I'll yield there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Turn to Councillor Duck, and then I'd like to make a comment, and Councillor Novick.
Yes, through you, Mayor, to staff. What is the actual costs of maintaining this? Because that's $200 a year is just the rental fee, but we have staff costs on top of that.
Through to Councillor Duck, it is minimal. We're out there 3 to 4 times a year, and we irrigate the area. So it's not an exorbitant amount of cost. The costs are they're combined with our downtown beautification funding. So we don't have that broken out, but that, it is minimal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Actually, I'll pass myself because I'm motivating and it's not a question, so I'll turn to Councillor Novick with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, is that site electrified for the possibility of putting an illuminated sign at some point?
Through to Councillor Novak, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and check.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. And we do have a recommendation. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that the license of occupation be renewed.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Novick is second. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole to motivate.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I won't die on my sword here or be offended if colleagues look to not support this. I think just looking at some initiatives the town may or may not take in the future in support of economic development, is there an opportunity to utilize this parcel, which was a fairly cost-effective location, towards some sort of signage recognizing our retail community or West Sydney. And so I think I'd kind of like to run the course on that process and hold this in a renewal while that dialogue emerges. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to seconder. Councillor Novick, and then, sorry, I'll start a speaking list here if I might. Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in full agreement with my colleague. I think $200 is minimal cost. It hardly shows up as a blip on our budgets. And I think the potential for helping to promote the town, promote the merchants, especially when we're undertaking a new economic development initiative, these are the sort of things that over time really do add to the appeal, attraction of the city, help to bring people into the town, and highlight the merchants who are working very hard to recover from COVID. And unfortunately, there are some that we've lost, and there may be others too, but I think it's probably worth our while to look into it a little more fully and at least get some sense of what it would cost to utilize that for some signage or some other feature that would stand the town in good stead. I think letting it go is just a lost opportunity, and for what it costs us, I think we'd be foolish to let it go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor Duck, then Councillor Duncan, and Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I'm going to support this motion. As my colleague Councillor O'Toole said, I think there's an opportunity here that we don't want to lose, and I think there should be some discussion with the BIA as to some marketing initiative by them to put something there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Duncan.
I'm going to oppose this motion. The cost currently to keep it is $200 plus probably a couple hundred in irrigation costs and staff fee to maintain it. However, if what we want to do is have council subsequently make a motion arising to have staff investigate whether there is development or an opportunity here to put in a sign, that's going to cost us many more thousands of dollars. And we just had an economic development. We just went through this whole process. A report was made, a consultant was hired, an economic development committee was struck, the business community was already consulted. Nobody brought up this site or the idea of putting any additional signs on this site. The West Side community has not brought this up. If there was an opportunity here, we already just paid somebody a lot of money and we already just went into an extensive consultation process to identify whether that would have happened. Since nobody brought it up, I don't think it exists. And so I don't have any problem with letting this go, rather than have this become something that has to spin out into an expensive process to discover what we already know, which is that nobody has any plans for this site.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Garnett, then myself.
Thank you. I won't support the motion. Councillor Duncan covered a lot of the points. Yeah, so I'll just reiterate, in our economic development strategy, Nobody said that's what we needed there. In fact, in the past when we've talked about, there has been talk about an entrance feature for the town, but that wasn't deemed to be a good location. Location we need, that location doesn't catch the tens of thousands of people that come off the ferry. If we're gonna do an entrance feature, that's not the place to do it. We need to do it further up the highway, the north side and the south side. So it's not a good location for that. As Councillor Duncan said, I concur that if council decides we want to look into this further, that's going to take more staff time, more money. Staff have already indicated that they've done some preliminary investigation already, and in terms of flags or signage, but the cost is too high. In terms of the other things that we have going on, and in terms of other things we have on our economic development strategy, I think there's better things to focus our time on than, keeping this little plot of land and hoping that maybe something one day maybe might happen. So I'll oppose the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then myself.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, through you to staff, a question just popped in my mind. Reading the report, it says staff note that it is a small lease space which may not always be available to the town and therefore may not be the most appropriate location. So as I read that, I don't want to try and figure out what your actual meaning is, but does staff feel that investing potential resources of town staff or town amenities into a space that isn't ours that we're leasing, that we may not always have control over, would you say that that's probably maybe not the best use of our finances? Because we may actually not ever have the space for always.
Through to Councillor Garnett, there's a real potential that if the site did develop, the owner or future developer would take that away from the town. The termination clause in the agreement is 30 days notice,
Yeah.
so it could very quickly, just be removed from our hands.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I won't support the motion. I, by coincidence, was on council in 2009 when this came up, and so Wanda landed there in 2002 and was removed in 2009, as indicated in the staff report. And it was a great opportunity at the time. It just fit. It's a very small parcel at 28 square meters. I think better in square feet, but I know that's small. And the council of the day in 2009 had the same conversation we're having today. Is there an opportunity in the future? And that was 14 years ago. And while $200 is nominal, we've been paying it for 14 years plus the additional cost. And quite frankly, with regards to the economic development plan and that sort of thing, I don't think this has been on anybody's radar. It's a small parcel, and an opportunity hasn't come forward. There wasn't, something might have landed, like Wanda landed there, but you don't want to invest a lot in that small piece. We've had comments about what the best location is. That was a consideration back in the day. And so I'm supportive of what council or what staff have brought forward and their recommendations. So won't support this recommendation. I'll turn to second-time speakers. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just reiterate. I mean, I recognize it's not highlighted in our economic development strategy. What I think it could do as we move through the process of acting on economic development opportunities and recognizing our retailers, and in particular trying to highlight West Sydney, is there's an opportunity there that frankly we haven't explored. It's been there for a number of years. I don't know that it's at risk of immediate redevelopment in the nearest future, and so I'll continue to support the motion, see what happens. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to any second-time speakers. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it wasn't in our economic development strategy, but what was in our economic development strategy was to appoint a person or entity to implement that economic development strategy, and it would be the role of that entity or person to take a space like this and turn it into something that would have economic benefits to the community. I think all of that could easily happen within the next year. And so spending $200 for us to at least get it on the table and have somebody look at it and do some kind of an economic determination as to whether or not it has value, rather than just out of hand say, well, we haven't used it in the past, so we might as well just get rid of it. We haven't done our homework on it. I think it would be worthwhile to spend the $200, get it back on the table, and then have that economic development person or entity come back to council and say, we've looked at it, we can see no useful purpose to keeping it. And so at that point, I'd be very happy to support the motion to get rid of it. But we haven't done our homework, and I think it behooves us to take advantage. This is an asset right now for the town. The fact that we have this lease and that it is only costing us $200, it's an asset that we could use if we put the effort towards it. So I still think it's worth supporting, at least for the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn to Councillor O'Keefe, as a second-time speaker, I have a question through to staff, and that is, if council, if this motion on the floor were to pass, which would keep the lease in place, staff have indicated in the report that they've done some preliminary work and ideas haven't been generated to date. There would be further direction required from council if staff were to pursue it further after the lease was renewed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would suggest that we would need some relatively clear direction from council if you want us to pursue anything, or we sit on it for the time being.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe as the second-time speaker, then Councillor Duck.
Thank you. So, just something I think should be clarified, anyways, in my mind, with the economic development strategy and this entity that's going to, make something happen with that. The role of that person, as I understand it, and staff can correct me if my understanding is incorrect, but that the economic development strategy that we have is the economic development strategy that we had. And that if we're going to have some person come in, what that person would be focused on is what is already there. Because we've already gone through a huge process and spent a lot of money to decide what we need to do to further economic development in the community. And something on that space did not come up. And so to go and ask somebody to go and research that more doesn't make any sense. So that wouldn't, if there's the impression that we could get that person to look into that, that's not my understanding of what that lead entity would be doing. They would be focusing on implementing what we have already identified in the economic development strategy as I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'm going to continue to support this, as Councillor O'Toole mentioned in his opening of the motion, that there's some possibilities with the SBIA, and as Councillor Novak said, we're looking at a couple $100 to hold this spot for a little longer. The current representative on the BIA is the vice president of the, and is the vice president on the SBIA, is the property owner on that corner. I think there's a very strong connection to seeing some support for retail. I think there's an opportunity to engage the SBIA at no cost to the town to look at this as potential future promotional activity for those northbound. Yes, we've got a strong southbound, but this would be for the northbound, and there's nothing wrong with continuing to have that presence there on that northeast corner for those coming out to the ferry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, myself, and Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you. I will now turn to
Point of
item
information. There is currently
point of order.
a point of order. There's no decision on that, then, because the motion was defeated, but there's still nothing current.
Okay, I will turn to council for direction regarding the lease.
I was just going to make the recommendation of the original staff recommendation.
Please go forward.
Thank you. I move that the license of occupation not be renewed.
Second?
Moved and seconded. I don't think there's any further discussion. All in favor? Opposed? We have 3 opposed. Councillor Novak, Councillor Rintoul, and Councillor Duck. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for the point of order, Councillor Duck. We are now turning to item 13C, which is a request for street vending license, Holy Cow Mini Donuts. I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a street vending license application for a mini donut vendor to operate during the June 30th fireworks event on the waterfront in Sydney. The proposed location is the north end of Eastview Park, just parked on the street of Eastview Drive adjacent to the sidewalk. And staff feel that it's an appropriate use of the space during that event and fits well with the festivities. The requirements of the street vending policy would apply. And staff are also proposing that 4 additional approvals for vendors be delegated to staff if they come forward. None have yet, but if they do, to be located to the south of this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. I'll begin with Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to staff, is this the type of timeline we've normally seen, or do Peninsula Celebrations kind of formalize their schedule in advance? And in addition to that question, do Peninsula Celebrations not normally kind of spearhead sourcing vendors of this nature, or do vendors not approach PCS directly? Just trying to get a feel for historically. I just don't recollect something like this coming on the front end previously. Thank you.
Through to Councillor Rintoul. So PCS organizes the activities on July 1st. The fireworks on June 30th are organized by the town. So they are organized by the town, and so they're 2 separate days.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Thanks, Councillor Rintoul. Turn to Councillor Novak.
Thank you. Through you to staff, Mr. Mayor. I love the idea of street food. I think it's great. However, in my experience, inevitably there is a huge trash problem. And I know that in this documentation here, we talk about placing the responsibility for collecting trash upon the vendors. But the reality is that they're busy selling food and they're not out collecting trash. And if we add 4 slots to that and we get 4 additional trucks selling food there, then of course the waste factor increases exponentially. And my question is, do we have a strategy to deal with that? Because the place becomes unsightly very, very quickly. And while I'd love to see this there, I think it's a great attraction, brings people to the waterfront, but we need to know that the place is going to stay clean. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to staff. Ms. Clary.
Sure. Through to Councillor Novak. The town does have staff around for the fireworks, and we do go and clear garbage cans. We do expect a higher level of garbage to be generated on these evenings. So that is part of just our regular routine for the June 30th firework events. I'm not sure if Mr. Newcomb has anything he would like to add. No. So.
Can I continue?
Please.
I agree, but this will generate an additional level of activity that hasn't been there in the past with these food trucks, and addition, and like I said, an exponentially greater level of waste. That's the part that I'm concerned about, not the normal strategy of emptying trash cans.
Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Novak. Just reiterating, I think number 9 in the policy is that they have to supply their own trash receptacle. Admittedly, some people might buy the food and walk away. There are town garbage cans pretty frequently in that area, so between the vendors' garbage and that they need to take away themselves and the town's garbage receptacles, staff feel that we're covered.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe with a question.
Thank you. Sticking with the topic of waste, question through you to staff. So would we, knowing that there's going to be potentially 4 food trucks there, while I recognize that they're responsible for having their own waste, would we be considering adding our own waste bins up there as well? I guess I'm just concerned about, the additional waste and the, for the neighborhood, and so whether we might consider adding bins there to mitigate that.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, no, the town doesn't typically add our own waste bins. We usually count on the event organizers to bring in additional waste bins as required. But there are a number, as Mr. Newcomb alluded to, there are a number of municipally owned waste bins around the waterfront already.
Okay. Well, I guess we could, if it didn't go well this year, then we would know what to do next year anyway, so. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Council, before proceeding, I think we're getting a little operational here. In 2019, we closed Beacon Avenue 23 times for events. I think the staff has a great experience operationally in managing waste for events in the community. But if there's any further questions, please proceed. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. And I'm assuming if things go badly in that direction that staff would make us aware of that in future. So for any kind of future applications, that information would be provided to us. You would hear from the public and you would get back to us. That would probably be a fair assumption, would I not? Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We do have a recommendation. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
I'd like to move the recommendation that that Holy Cow Mini Donuts be granted approval to operate a mobile vending cart on public property at the north end of Eastview Drive, immediately adjacent to Eastview Park, during the fireworks event on June 30th, 2023, subject to the following conditions. A, that the applicant meet all requirements of street vending policy DV010. B, that the mobile vending cart be oriented to vend directly onto the sidewalk in the location indicated in Appendix A. And C, that the traffic delineators be placed on the street side of the corners of the mobile vending cart. And number 2, that council authorize staff to approve up to 4 additional street vending applications to operate on Eastview Drive during the evening of June 30th, 2023.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover.
Yeah, I think that staff have this well under control. We run events in Iroquois, Tallista, Mary Winspear lands, and as the mayor mentioned, the street market. I have no concerns that this will be well handled by staff, and they do an exemplary job after all of those events in making sure that it's clean and well presented. So I'm fully supportive of this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, in concurrence with Councillor Duck, I have full confidence in staff with regarding this issue, and I think it's also important to remember for those that have concerns that it behooves this company to behave appropriately, or guess what? They come back in the future and they don't get the approval of council. So I think in their interest, and whoever else might apply, they're going to do a good job because they want to keep coming back. They want the business, so it just makes common sense. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'm going to turn to a question for staff. I don't recall in the report, but can staff comment on whether the applicant indicated what time they would operate?
The applicant is essentially willing to follow the time of the event that the town is putting on. So they're willing to set up when the town suggests they should set up and close down when the town suggests they should close down. But the event has not been completely finalized yet, so those times are not set in stone.
Okay, I think I'm comfortable without an amendment and leaving that to staff. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now turning to 13D, which is the Parkland Track Funding Agreement. I'll turn to staff. Mr. Hissick, did you wish to introduce this? Perhaps I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, as part of the recent budget process, Council approved a request from School District 63 to assist in funding the replacement of the track at Parkland. It's a funding amount of $83,000, matched by the District of North Saanich. Council resolved that a funding agreement be in place So this staff report and the proposed funding agreement is attached for council's consideration. And it also takes into consideration the annual contribution of $6,700 for asset replacement as well.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. Appreciating the agreement, there's two components of it, and we already have approved it through our budget process, and this is just the finalizing of the actual agreement. So I guess my only question arises around the sharing partner in terms of the replacement reserve funding. And the only reason I bring that up is because I did watch the April 24th District of North Saanich meeting. They did approve the $83,000 as we did, but there was some debate about the replacement reserve, and they didn't actually go through with that as of yet. So I'm wondering, in the unlikely event that they don't sign off on that, will that alter or change our portion of this agreement?
That's a good question, Councillor Garnett. I guess we may have to revisit it based on that decision. I'm not sure if Mr. Hisik has a different perspective or opinion, but yeah, it may be something that requires revisiting if North Saanich decides to go in a different direction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Garnett. I think given that we're approving a specific amount, if there was going to be any change in commitment, it would have to come back to council, as you've indicated. Councillor O'Keefe, I believe you're next.
Thank you. My concerns are around 15 years from now. Probably none of us will be at this table. Maybe staff have retired. Probably the people at SD 63 that were involved will be somewhere else. So my question to staff is, what mechanisms are in place to make sure 15 years from now that money gets used as designated? And I guess my concern is, the agreement says that they have to use it for that. And we know that. But 15 years from now, Parkland is a school that's had declining enrollment for a number of years. They've managed to keep it going with international students. But 15 years from now, the school district may decide, yeah, we're not going to do a track. Who's going to remember or hold them accountable that we gave them a bunch of money, and how do we get that back? So I guess that's my question to staff. What sort of mechanism is in place? And I guess I'll add on to that. In the in the agreement in section 4 under reporting, number A says, upon request by the town, SD 63 will provide a statement. I'm wondering, would we have a better chance of holding them accountable if we required an annual report to show where the monies are being put?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Mr. Hisik. Hello again. Did you wish to comment? Or? Oh, I see you're frozen in time. Mr. Hisik. I'll let you go ahead, Mr. Humble, and I do have a comment.
I'm not sure how Andrew would respond, but I think it's like any agreement. I think any long-term agreement, that's a lot of conjecture, in terms of what may happen, what if, etc. The bottom line is we have an agreement in place, and we would expect them to honor that agreement. So I don't know if there's anything that we can put in place that is going to ensure that, other than having the agreement that we have. And we've gone through this process because council's requested a funding agreement for these types of allocation of funding. So I don't really have much more to say regarding the matter.
Thank you. I will comment to council that we're getting operational again. I mean, our responsibility as a body is setting policy. I think we're setting good policy and having a funding agreement. I think we have dozens of agreements in place at the town. In fact, I'm amazed when I see the number of agreements we have. And the town has many decades of experience in that. But I will turn back to colleagues for questions. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and please excuse me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but the answer to my colleague's question is in Article number 6 of the funding agreement.
Thank you. So we've had questions. I don't see any further. We do have a staff recommendation. Councillor Rintoul.
Move the recommendation that the Parkland Track funding agreement with the Saanich School District number 63 be approved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? None are opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And now we turn to item 13E, which is the 2022 year-end financial results. We thank staff for the detailed, lengthy report. I'll turn to staff if they wish to introduce. Mr. Hissick has had some connection problems. I'll turn to Ms. Chen if you would like to introduce, please. Please come forward. Or to a mic.
Thank you. So this is the last of the 3 regular financial reports that we present to council, with the first 2 being presented the 6 and 9 months marks during the year. This report presents the year's operating results for each of our operating budgets, as well as a summary of the status of our capital projects. In addition, the year-end report also reviews and evaluates the adequacy of our accumulated surplus balances following another year of operations. Just to summarize results for the year between the different operating areas, the results were mixed, with 2 of the operating funds performing better than what we budgeted for, and the other 2 being worse off than what we budgeted for. So there's lots of notes in the reports explaining the various reasons for that, but I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions on the report. Seeing none, thank you again, Ms. Chen. Sorry, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. Through to Ms. Chen. Just with respect to A17 sewer, which refers to the deficit of $314,000. As I recollect, the methodology for collecting on sewer, for charging and collecting on sewer, was intended to be revisited, if I'm not mistaken. So could staff either confirm that for me, or let me know I imagined it, and maybe speak to perhaps a timeline with the intent to changing how that is calculated. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, a comprehensive review of the sewer rate structure is still in the plan. So if you recall, we did a comprehensive review of the water rate structure back in 2021. We were waiting for a year or so to gain some experience with that new water rate structure to see how it actually operated in reality. And we're quite happy with the results, as you can see with our operating results for the water fund. The intent was to start that review sooner, but we've had some staffing resource challenges in the finance department. In addition, this year we have some additional projects related to some new financial reporting requirements that are coming online this year. You may recall our auditor mentioning that when they did their presentation. So I think realistically, staff capacity this year isn't there to do the review, but it is definitely a priority item that's still on the agenda. And as I recall, I think we're hopeful that there will be time to work on this starting in 2024, with a report coming forward for something to be implemented in 2025.
Thank you very much.
But in the meantime, we have raised rates this year to keep in line with increases that were getting passed on to us from the CRD. So.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Keith, then to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. Turning my attention to Parks, A12. So questions through you, Mr. Mayor, through staff. So that seems like a fairly significant overage in terms of the budget, and I understand the reasons. What I'm wondering is, in the budget for 2023, I don't remember what we approved for 2023, but did staff have this information, and have they adjusted the budget for 2023, knowing that we're probably, we're gonna have hotter and drier summers. There's gonna continue to be rises in gas and diesel prices, and we didn't plan for that in 2022. So have we planned for that in 2023?
I unfortunately don't have a comprehensive answer off the top of my head. That's certainly something I can dig into and get some more details back. I know it's a challenge every year with timing of getting year-end results, fully realized while we're still going through the budget process. But I think we were certainly aware of some of the cost pressures that were in play in the Parks Department, and some of it would have been incorporated into the 2023 budget. I'm just not 100% sure off the top of my head which aspects of it have been incorporated, but that's something we can look into for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you through you to staff, Ms. Chen, for pinch hitting, so to speak, for Mr. Hisik, who's lost in cyberspace. I just want to thank staff for the report. For a novice, like I've said this in the past, but for a layperson and a novice like myself, it's really helpful to understand. And I just want to point out for the public watching, because it was something that I looked at and I was actually really in awe and so impressed by the one particular aspect under capital projects, under the miscellaneous completed projects, to see the 21 projects at a cost of $2.4 million, and you look at the actual and what was budgeted, and you're only off by just over $5,000. Like, it just shows you how incredibly talented the staff is at budgeting, because that's, like, to me, to be able to come that close when the numbers are that big is, I tip my hat to you. That's impressive. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor.
Seeing no further discussion, we don't require a motion to receive, as we've received it on our agenda. So again, thank you to Ms. Chen, and also to Mr. Hisik. We know how much work is involved in accomplishing all the good things in the report, but also in putting this report together. Council, thank you. I'll next turn to section 14, which is correspondence. We have two items. The first is 14A, the quarter policing report, January to March 2023. We don't have a presentation this evening, but I will turn to council members if there are any comments or questions that could be directed through to staff to bring back at a future date. Seeing none, again, we don't need a motion to receive. There's no recommendation. It's for information only. So I will turn to you now, Councillor O'Keefe. You requested raising item 15.7, which is an email from Mr. Strella F. regarding increase in fire department calls dated May 7th, and our Fire Chief Mickelson's reply dated May 8th. Please go ahead.
Sure. So I think the chief provided a very good explanation as to why the fire department handles these calls. But I just wanted to add, for the benefit of the member of the public that wrote in, and maybe for my council colleagues as well, that at the most recent AVICC, which is the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, right, so there was a resolution that was passed that this issue of local governments expending additional resources due to shortfalls with the BC Ambulance, that would be forwarded to the Union of BC Municipalities Convention as a resolution, with the goal of lobbying the provincial government to address this. And that's, whether anything will come of that, we don't know. Resolutions go to UBCM and then they go to the provincial government, and it's up to them to decide whether they're going to move on that or not. But I just wanted the public to know that we're, as council, and not just our council, this is an issue in other municipalities up and down Vancouver Island. In talking to the chief previously, it's also an issue with municipalities around the province. So the most we can do as local governments is to bring it to the attention as a group to the provincial government and hope that they do something. So we've done what we can, and we'll hope that they'll take some action on that. That's all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe, and thank you for raising that and highlighting that while individual councils, and there's about 160 in the province of British Columbia, do have a voice, that regional bodies such as the Vancouver region and UBCM representing the province, which works collectively on behalf of all local governments in the province to advocate to particular ministries in the provincial government is certainly helpful, particularly for smaller municipalities such as ourselves. So we don't need to receive that for information. We've spoken to it. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any further comment on that. Seeing none, I will acknowledge we have, get the number right here. We do have 12 other pieces of correspondence that we are receiving for information on the agenda this evening. Having covered that, we have no notices of motion. We do have a motion to go in camera this evening. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting a personnel matter and the acquisition or disposition of land or improvements pursuant to section 90.1A and E of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
We have that moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries, and we'll seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff, and good evening to members of the public.